Have you ever wondered why all of these countries in Central Asia end in stan? Well, in this episode of Weird Borders, I'm going to explain why, as well as why we give all countries the name that we give them in English. Country names come in two basic flavors: endonyms, which are a local or native name for a country, of which they may have many, and exonyms, which are an outside or foreign name for a country, which they don't call themselves. An example of an exonym is Germany, which is what we say in English, although locally they refer to it as Deutschland. But why don't we just call a country by their endonym? Doesn't that seem polite? Well, in every language around the world we use exonyms, and there's three basic reasons for doing so. The first and simplest is just pronunciation. We anglicize a lot of words because they're a bit difficult for an English speaker to say without practice, like we say Spain instead of España. This is even true when we use an endonym like Mexico, whereas an average Spanish speaker would say Mexico. Sometimes it's not a mispronunciation, like with the Netherlands, which is actually translated from the Dutch word Nederlands, which means Netherlands. We also translate common words into English for ease of pronunciation, such as democratic or republic, and they wouldn't use that in their endonym because English isn't their national language. A second and a bit stranger type of exonym is when we use an intermediary language to give us our exonym, as we do with Japan, which actually calls itself Nihon or Nippon. We got our English name for Japan through a kind of game of exonym telephone. The first time the English ever had to have a word for Japan was because the Portuguese told them it existed, and the Portuguese called it Japan. But the Portuguese got their name from the Malay, who actually called it Japang. But the Malay got their name from the Chinese, who at the time called it Sepangu. Through this weird game of telephone, our exonym Japan is actually a derivation of three other exonyms. The third reason is familiarity. Generally speaking, around the world, countries have their own name for their neighbors, the same way that we have nicknames for our friends. Finland calls Sweden Ruotsi, even though the Swedish call themselves Sverige. And the Japanese call Japan Urban, even though that's really just a translation of Nihon. As I explained in episode 19, the term Guinea is actually a foreign word that refers to West Africa, and the countries of Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Equatorial Guinea have adopted the term, meaning that their endonym actually comes from an exonym. These stan countries actually represent everything that I've talked about up until this point. The suffix stan actually comes from the Persian word which means land, meaning that countries like Uzbekistan translate to land of the Uzbeks. But that doesn't mean that these are all exonyms. You see, Tajikistan actually speaks Persian, making it an endonym. Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan have all adopted the suffix stan into their language, so although it started off as an exonym, it is really an endonym. Kyrgyzstan is actually exclusively an exonym since their endonym is Kyrgyz Republic. Pakistan is a little bit different. It was first created in 1933 and translates in the local Urdu language as Land of the Pure, which makes it the only stan not named after the native people. In the next episode, I'm going to explain why Greenland is so big, so follow if you'd like to see that. Thanks for watching.